Dodge this.
One world currency.
The New World Order.
Those are the roots of trouble.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition of DTRH. It is May 21st, 2015. Tonight's live edition is going to be a humdinger, let me tell you. We're going to be getting back into Road Trip Report. But I said we. Who's we? Papa, you do a show by yourself. What are you, French? No, I'm not French, ladies and gentlemen. I have a co-pilot with me today. Now, who could be co-piloting Down the Rabbit Hole with me? Oh, that's right. That's right, my co-pilot from the road trip. Who was my co-pilot from the road trip, ladies and gentlemen? Let me tell you something. She's the best co-pilot, hands down, anyone could have. I'll thank her in a minute, but first let me introduce my co-pilot for this evening. Someone who I have to give a big thank you to, because if it weren't for her, I wouldn't have been able to accomplish my mission, and I said this last week, but I will thank her here in the intro. A big thank you for what you did for me, my dear. I owe you more than I could say with words. So who could I be talking about, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't figured it out already? It is the one, the only, Christina Consolo, a.k.a. Rad Chick. Christina, welcome back to the broadcast.
Thanks, Popeye. And last time I was on, I said right at the beginning, because I had forgot it was such a long time since we had interviewed, that you always nail it with the intros. But now I really feel like I have VIP status.
Well, you do have VIP status, my dear. And before we get into the whole road trip report, I want to publicly thank you in front of the thousands of people that are listening and the thousands that'll hear this in the archives. I thanked you the other day. I know you were listening, but I want to give you a big thank you because what you did for me was above and beyond the call of duty, and you are absolutely an amazing friend, an amazing co-pilot, an amazing woman, and I love you very much. And if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been able to accomplish my mission, so thank you very much, honey. It was rough, and if it weren't for you being there for me, I wouldn't have been able to accomplish it, so thank you. Anyway.
I owe you a huge thanks, too, because this trip, I had never been on a trip like this before. And, when we were getting ready to leave, I clearly remember you showing me the Garmin from my house to the Grand Canyon, and I had this like momentary panic when I saw how far we were driving. And I've never been in a car that long, let alone like with a back problem and other things. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know. And within like 5 minutes of getting on our way, it was like fine. And I mean, to say that it was an epic journey is just such an understatement. It's really hard to put into words what happened on this trip.
I agree. The word epic is like the only thing I could say to describe the journey from start to finish. I mean, everything about it. I mean, in my half, I mean, I was on the road for like almost a month. And what people don't know is that you were actually my co-pilot even when you weren't physically with me. You were doing radar readings and stuff for me, weather reports as I was driving, letting me know what I was driving into. So, no, you really are a great co-pilot. And we had a blast. We saw a ton of stuff too. A lot of wind farms. Those things are huge, huh?
Yeah. Oh, we have so many great pictures, and we're gonna do something with these pictures. I don't know what yet. I've kept all the really, really special ones to myself for right now. I've posted a couple of them on Twitter and on Facebook and things like that. But I think altogether, what did we figure out? We took one picture every 2 miles, about, if not more. I mean, we have almost we have like 3,000 pictures that we took. And I know that sounds crazy, but I haven't even uploaded the stuff from my phone yet. I don't know what I even have on my phone. There was just so much, and to like sit down and go through them, it's like taking the trip all over again. And we need to do something really special with those.
Yeah, we need to like put together a book or something.
I know we do, because there's such a backstory to many of them too, and some of the people that we photographed, and just everything.
Yeah, I think it would make a good coffee table book. Perhaps we should put a coffee table book together based on the. Oh, where have I heard that idea before? Oh, that's right. You and I have discussed this already.
Yeah.
Stay tuned, listeners. In 3 or 4 months, there might be a road trip book out filled with awesome photos and life lessons from the trip. So I guess let's start there. Before we get into the radiation readings and all that, we got 2 hours. What's your perspective shift since like before the trip and after the trip? Because you heard me do my show where I talked about this, but I want to give you some time. Go ahead and tell the listeners about your perspective shift, your outlook on things, pre-trip and post-trip.
Well, America's a very big place. Which is obvious. And, when you fly around, I mean, that's part of the reason I always like take the window seat when I fly, because I love even taking pictures from planes, just seeing all the things that are happening and what the news stories are that are happening in all of these places at the same time. I always like think about this, when I'm flying, but like to drive through it and stop along the way and talk to people. If I wasn't mad and upset about the radiation stuff before, like I certainly am now. And part of it is because of all the extremely cool people that we met along the way. And we met people everywhere. And for the listeners who haven't had the great fortune to ever speak to Popeye in person or hang out with him, he is just like he is on the radio. In what I call real life, real time. It's not an act. He talks to everybody, everywhere that we go. And, and the veterans, we saw a lot of veterans, and he had all these interactions with them, and just people were just so cool. Once we got out of the Midwest, and I'm not knocking people that live in the Midwest. I live in the Midwest, but coming back from this trip after we had been all of these, places where, the vista is so expansive. And like you had said on your road trip show that you did last week, you look to the left and you look to the right and you see nothing. It's such an amazing place out there. And the people that we came in contact with just blew me away. Coming back from the trip, you start to notice as soon as you get to like Missouri, Illinois, especially when you get around Chicago, the way people drive. There's no interaction with each other. Like when you stop at a truck stop or whatever, people are very, like, they really keep to themselves. And everywhere else really wasn't like that. People were super friendly and open, and seeing that and seeing how beautiful everything was everywhere, it makes me just furious at what is happening to us, at the way that we're being lied to, at the way that we're being misled. And I thought about this a lot today, and the way that people used to do research and the way that they do it now, the way that we're all connected in social media. A lot of people think of their friends on social media, their friends on Facebook. Those aren't really friends. And I've said this on other shows that I've done. Social media is not a substitute for social interaction, for personal interaction, for having real conversations with people. And I always try to encourage others to do that. And if you have people that you interact with on a frequent, even a daily basis, at some point you really need to sit down and have a conversation, like on the phone or, even in person. And you see a whole different side of that person, and all of a sudden you understand where they're coming from in a way that interacting on social media never allows you to do. But we've allowed that to kind of like take over our life, and our interactions are very limited because of it. We think that we have, these friends, quote unquote friends, or these relationships, and that's really not what they are at all. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I've been, thinking about a lot too. And
that's pretty deep stuff right there. That's
you think so?
Yeah, I would say so. It's perspective.
I'm not as good at vocalizing this kind of stuff as you are. I mean, you can just flow with it, but I'm still processing everything that happened on the strip. And I told you while we were gone too, like, I don't even know what to think sometimes about some of the things that we're seeing, some of the things that are happening. But when I get home, I know that I'm going to think about it a lot. That's when I process things is later. And I'm still, like, I've been home 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks now, and I'm still processing everything that happened. And I've had some interaction with people that I never expected to. And I'll bring up the Grand Canyon story again for the people that follow me and may just be, hearing about this road trip for the first time. While we were at the Grand Canyon, somebody died. Somebody fell off the south rim of the canyon, and it happened like right next to where we were. And it was really crazy. Like, we didn't know at the time. We knew somebody got hurt because we heard all of the ambulances, and we had heard this like strange like yell that happened. And we had been taking pictures of some people that were standing in an area that was like way out and where they probably shouldn't have been. It was very difficult to get down there. And there were others that had this same kind of foreboding that we did. And they were taking pictures of these people too. And when the next day we had met these other guys that were backpacking, and they had told us, or I don't remember how exactly we found out, but we found out somebody had died by falling, and and then we found out it was right where we were. And it's like, oh my God, that was probably what we heard. That was why we heard the ambulances. And I tried to track down the family of this gentleman that fell, because I had a picture of him that I probably only took a few minutes before he fell. And it was actually a woman that he was talking to that was way out on this outcropping of rocks, and she was doing yoga, and she was sitting right on the edge, and there's like this, 400 or 500-foot drop right in front of her, and this rock is like leaning that she's sitting on, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. And I was taking pictures of her, worried that she was going to be the one to fall. And there was a man next to her that was speaking to her, and he had this big smile on his face. And you could see how happy he was, and this was the guy that fell. And when I came back from the trip and I looked up the news report, I saw that it was the same person. And I tried, having lost a parent in a very bad accident that happened while my dad was on vacation in 2004, and he got hit by a motorcycle crossing the street on the last night of his trip, and he had just gone and like mailed postcards, and I knew like how much I wanted to know everything that happened, like before that happened, like what was he doing, how could he cross the street without looking both ways, and it turned out this guy had run a red when he had hit him. And so it took me a long time to put these pieces together. But when I saw this picture of this guy and how happy he was, I thought, if I was the family, like I would want this picture. And I tried going through the news, and I couldn't get a hold of anyone who could forward me his contact info or his family's contact info. And then, like 2 days ago, I woke up in the morning and I still not heard from this newscaster. And I'm like, I want to finish this today, because I was like, it really bothered me that they didn't know that someone has this picture. And so I found a gentleman that had been quoted in the report that worked at Las Vegas Speedway with this guy that had fallen, and it was like his best friend. And I was able to get his the phone number to Las Vegas Speedway, and I called there and I asked for him, and I talked to him for a while. And I explained to him, what was going on, and he's so wrecked over this situation, to lose a guy like this who just loved life, and he talked to everybody where he went. And he made this huge difference in so many people's lives and when people are like that, that's when you really, the whole, stress of losing somebody like that, especially tragically, really hits hard. And so I sent him the picture, and he and I have actually corresponded a few times, and he said, "You've restored my faith in humanity for tracking me down like this. Like, I can't even tell you what this picture means to me." And, so we had these like aftershocks of the trip where we're still having interactions with people like that. And that was, really kind of a random thing. And I explained to him why we were there. And, that's hopefully that will help him and help his family. And, that was just one of the things that happened. It was just like, just kind of this incredible like coincidence that I took this picture right before this guy fell.
I remember looking out at the people on that precipice, and everybody had a feeling. I talked about this last week, but I don't know how to describe it. It was, you felt it. And so did a bunch of other people that were walking past. A couple came past us. Remember the one couple that came by? And the wife was genuinely freaked out. Like, and then I think she was German. The lady came out. She didn't speak any English, but she was like, you could see she pointed to them, and she like did the motion like she had shivers, up and down her legs, and it gave her goosebumps. You could see, and everybody just had this weird feeling that something was going to happen. So,
yeah, I speak German, and I never even thought to speak German to that lady. Like, we were kind of doing the sign language thing with her, and it's like, oh wait, that's how freaked out I was.
You could just feel it. It was to the point where, if you remember, when that was at the point where we were walking down that path, and there were people that were walking really close. They weren't even monitoring their kids, And like after that, you and I started to remember we started to look at all the people with their kids that were walking around just because there's no railings there. Like I don't think people understand. There's no railings on the Grand Canyon. There's a couple little viewing platforms that stick out over it that they obviously have to have a railing on, but the natural edge of the canyon, which makes up 99.9% of what you walk past or drive past, has no. There's sections of the road where there's no guardrail. It's just canyon. You think I'm kidding? Ask Christina. We drove the scenic route.
Yeah. And, you know, there was a lady that was coming up that path, and she was probably 10 or more years older than me. And she saw me taking pictures through this, like, outcropping of trees of these people. And she thought that I was hesitating to go on that path. And she goes, "Oh, honey, if I can do it, you can do it." And she looked like she was about ready to have a stroke. And she was wearing flip-flops. And, like, I'm wearing, you know, police boots because that's what I wear when I'm in terrain like that. I don't want to, like, lose my footing or anything. And I'm thinking, you couldn't pay me to go down that path. There's no way. And, you know, people, when they're on vacation, they have this, like, false sense of security sometimes, too. And I had a friend in I was with for her birthday in Vegas probably 12 years ago. And she walked right out in front of a car, like just not paying attention. And I grabbed her by the back of her dress and like yanked her back. And she was really like ticked off at me until she saw she almost got hit by a car. And you know, the whole thing that happened to my dad too. Like, you know, I know people don't pay as close of attention when they're on vacation. And maybe, you know, that's why they think it's okay to go down, you know, paths and flip-flops when you're like, you know, out of shape or you don't have the proper gear and things like that.
I remember you were taking pictures and the guy came up first and I saw him like, because I was standing off to the right and I saw him out of the corner of my eye and you couldn't see him and I was like, oh, this is going to blow her mind. And because it was like a drop off right there and they came up out of this path, which kind of just appeared out of nowhere. And he comes up and then she follows wearing flip-flops. And that's when she made the comment to you, well, if I can do it in flip-flops. And you just looked at me, and I was like, yeah, I know. You didn't even have to say anything. You just looked at me, and I was just like, wow. Shaking.
Seriously?
Seriously. But you notice the don't fall off the edge signs were in like 4 different languages. And then the only sign that I saw that was specifically in English was the one telling people not to feed coins to, like, was it falcons or condors or whatever that come up?
Yeah.
And it's only in English. So that means, ladies and gentlemen, as I told you last week, that the only people that they're speaking to are the idiot Americans. In our own country, we have to be told not to feed coins to wild animals. The foreigners don't need to be told this. We do. And I looked at the sign and I said this out loud, and the girl next to us, right? She was just like, I have no words. I'm in total agreement. I have no words. And then her and whoever she was with, the lady she was with, ended up talking for like 10 minutes about it. Like, I'm not the only one that noticed it. Neither was Christina. Yeah,
we had some funny conversations in that spot with people.
Oh, yes. Well, just people watching in that one spot was interesting, to say the least.
Yeah.
And I did have to yell at a bunch of Chinese teenagers. You witnessed the loudness of them. I don't think you were able to catch me actually telling them to shut up.
I heard somebody yell, and I didn't know that was you. But I knew why you did, because those kids were really annoying.
Yes.
You know, yeah. The vibe was just like killing it there, and these kids were messing it up for everybody. Because the sunset at the Grand Canyon, I mean, it's such an amazing place, but the sunset is just wow. And, you know, I told this gentleman, too, the one whose friend died, I said, you know, the vibe there was so amazing. And I sent him some pictures of that evening, of that sunset that we saw. It'll all be in the book.
Right, it'll all be in the book 3 to 4 months from now. Popeye and Christina's Road Trip Report, the Coffee Table Edition. With complete philosophical insight at the end of each chapter. No, it was a perspective shifting. It was a perspective shifting trip, to say the least. Very interesting. I think it's funny that you actually made mention that I am the way I am on air in real life. Yes,
He is the way he is. Yep.
I really am like this. This isn't a radio shtick. I tell the listeners that, but you know, people will go, yeah, Popeye. You have to just hang out with me to actually witness the epicness. It's funny, to say the least. It's just, I am how I am. So I think that's one of the reasons we had such epic conversations with people, was just because of how you are and how I am. We kind of brought it out in people. And it was like random conversations about the most random things in the most random spots. I mean, how many people can say they stood on the rim of a meteor crater and gave out my business cards, like their own business cards for their radio show about conspiracies, right, and all this other stuff, and sat with you and talked about Fukushima and 9/11 with random people.
Yeah.
On the rim of a meteor crater in the middle of the desert in Arizona.
And the Chernobyl fires. I managed to work that into a few conversations, too.
Yes, you did.
Because that started, I first heard about that, I think, when we were going through New Mexico the first time. And we had really, really high radiation readings at a truck stop. And the air readings were super high, too. And then coming back, when we went and tested that same area, there seemed to have been a decay in the amount of radioactivity. And we actually have samples of that and are getting it tested. And I have somebody to test that for us, by the way.
Awesomeness. I'm going to pause this because I hear the break music sneaking up. Ladies and gentlemen, do not go anywhere. We can get back. We're going to get more into the radiation readings because I know that I have a ton of questions from last week from the listeners about it. And I got some audio from one of the videos I'm going to play. Stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. I want to get into the radiation level readings that Christina and I took out in New Mexico. Interesting. And we didn't plan on this. And I was actually literally a little bugged out by it. And you can even ask Christina. She'll verify. I talked to her a lot more about radiation. I mean, I was picking her brains the entire way out. She was showing me stuff. But then I was really, I guess once you see it for yourself, pinging on the Geiger counter, it's a little different than if you see a video, like a YouTube video, or you hear somebody talking about it. It's just different than it's just like with anything else. The experience itself is drastically different. I want to play the audio really quick. Just a little bit of it. It's only about a minute. I want to play this. This is from one of the trucks. This is actually the first video. We shot 3 of them about this. This was the first one. We were on our way out to the Grand Canyon, and we stopped in New Mexico, and we happened to be in Albuquerque, and we were talking about all the radiation, and Christina saw a sign. What did it say? Come see the Isotopes play? That's the name of one of the local sports teams. Baseball, basketball.
Get your tickets now.
Get your tickets to see the Isotopes. That's called normalization, ladies and gentlemen.
We were seeing them play at the truck stop.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, here, you want to see the Isotopes play? This is the Isotopes playing right here. You hear that noise? That's her Geiger counter. Geiger counter at a random truck stop in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Look what it did. Whatever's causing the radiation levels is affecting the cactus. That's not normal, just so we're all clear. There's Rad Chick's Geiger counter just going up, ticking away. I'll pause it there for a second. Christina, it's at 2:36. Now, I've been asked, because I mentioned this, and I mentioned these videos. And last week, in fact, you were listening, and I think you were texting me, telling me what unit of measurement they were, but I was road trip brain, and I didn't even see it until afterwards. The Geiger we were using, one of the thousands of questions I got about these videos that was repeated over and over and over again was, what unit of measurement is it reading in?
Well, it's an inspector Geiger counter. It reads in counts per minute. And it actually belongs to Miss Milky the Clown one on YouTube. She let me take it with us because I have a Soaks, which is not as good of an instrument as hers.
Plug her channel again, because people need to go to Miss Milky's channel and subscribe and pay attention. That woman busts her butt trying to inform people about radiation in Fukushima. So
she works endlessly. Like I don't even know how many hours a day she puts in, and she puts out these great videos with all this like hysterical stuff in between, as only she can do, you know. And the funny thing is, like, there's been a few radiation people that are like, I don't like the jokes that she makes, or I don't like that she puts the funny stuff in the videos. And then Christopher Busby, who's interviewed all over the world, this world-renowned specialist, we interviewed him together like 2 years ago from her house. And he was like, I love Miss Milky's videos. If I could make videos, I would make them exactly the way she does.
She uses kind of like sarcastic humor, which, you know what? That helps wake people up. So I'm all for it. I like her videos. I'm subscribed, and I'm telling all my listeners, if you want to know about Fukushima, look, there's two people that I pay attention to that I learned from about when it comes to Fukushima and radiation. I'm not kidding. One is Christina, and the other one is Miss Milky. Now, I listen to the other, I'll go and investigate what others, like researchers or specialists and stuff have to say. But like, as where I go for my sources of information, I go to you, and I go to Miss Milky's YouTube channel. I'm constantly tweeting her stuff out. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know her channel, you need to go check it out and subscribe to it. Christina, what's the name of it again in full?
Miss Milky the Clown 1.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. It's that simple. Today's day and age, you can hear the name of the channel and go look it up while you're listening. Thank you, Internet, because 21st century. So, in the video...
Well, and there's someone else that you need to listen to also, and I think you're probably going to have her on, and that's Lorraine Murray. And we actually talked to her in the car. That was a trip. Picked up these readings. Like we'd had a couple of conversations, and I would just put her on speakerphone, and it was so awesome, like introducing you guys, and then listening to the two of you talk, while we're driving, and about what was happening, and we filled her in.
It was pretty cool. The convo was all over the place.
I know, and she's a geoscientist. For those of you who aren't familiar with her work, she's a geoscientist, and she worked at both Lawrence Livermore and Los Alamos weapons labs. And she had gone on a speaking tour in Japan, and went to the Hiroshima Museum. She came back from there and quit her job and has never looked back. She became a whistleblower because of what she saw at that museum. And she has told me, and I don't know if she's ever like really discussed this in interviews either, that when she worked at the weapons lab, she didn't even really know like how bad things were. And because they're all like kind of mind controlled there, I mean, they really are. And so I have quite a few interviews with her on my channel too, on YouTube. We've done some very in-depth reporting on the problems occurring in airlines, the Wigner effect, which you've mentioned on your show, but she can speak about anything. I mean, she's just an encyclopedia of knowledge. She really is.
Yes, and I urge you to go check her stuff out and her interviews. And Christina, plug your YouTube channel, because all that stuff is up there, and you bust your butt putting out the interviews, because you do a lot of stuff off air too, like podcast style. So take 30 seconds and shamelessly plug yourself, everything you want to, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, whatever you want. Go ahead.
Okay, well, if you go to Climate Viewer News, that's Jim Lee's wonderful mapping website. I have all of my links there to Twitter and YouTube. My YouTube channel is just Radchick, 2 words, If you look up anything really about Fukushima on there, my stuff usually pops up. And what's going really crazy now, though, is the most viral stuff that I have on there is the airline stuff. And I think there's like 15, maybe close to 20 videos about just that. And that's something that's going to get worse with time. And we have just so much evidence about what is going on and why planes are breaking down as much as they are. But I don't want to take time away from the road trip to really get into that too much, although we saw a lot of signs of the crumbling infrastructure for sure.
Well, we're gonna do more shows together. Christina's going to be coming on more often. I'm dragging her back on air, so she knows this already. So it's not a surprise to her. But
there's no way you could fit it all in one show.
No. We could do a 2-hour show just about Wigner. We were having some epic conversations, which we're going to get into the infrastructure too, because you can see the effects of the infrastructure itself being old and dilapidated. And then if you even put in the nightmare scenario of a sped up decay process, oy. But yeah, it was kind of weird when we randomly pulled out the Geiger in New Mexico, and poof, radiation level readings higher than either one of us, I think, expected. You took
and the reason I went to that spot to check is because the cactus was dead. I mean, it just looked horrible, like somebody had, just poured acid all over it or something. It was like this horrible looking plant, and it's right next to a sidewalk. And I did not expect to find hazmat level readings there for sure. That was a big surprise. And but the air around Albuquerque, really in most of New Mexico, was a lot higher than I expected it to be. And we started noticing that too around Denver. And Denver was really bad. Denver, too, the radiation levels continued for like 100 miles outside of the city. And, it's very close to Rocky Flats, which is now a Superfund site. And in New Mexico, we have the WIP disaster, which was an underground nuclear repository where they were storing all this nuclear waste in drums. And there was, they're blaming it on the wrong kind of kitty litter was used to pack the drums. And that's why there was an explosion underground. But when it exploded, it came out of all the vent stacks before they realized what was happening and before they shut it down. And that blew out over Texas, Oklahoma, went up into Missouri and even in the Midwest in the first few weeks of that accident. And they had another accident there just recently, or they had very high levels that they attributed to, guys tracking it through the site on their boots or some stupid reason. And so we had that, and we have Los Alamos is out there where they have, tons of this stuff called like concrete, where they've put radioactive waste into concrete blocks and then just left it sitting out in the open all over. And the blocks, this happened at Rocky Flats too, but the concrete starts to break down, and so the things get exposed. And whenever there's a fire, like a brush fire or something like that, it just gets, revolatilized. And that happens really with any kind of weather condition. And it's so funny because when people say, oh, I live here or I live there, we have a Superfund site that's, 50 miles to the north, or something like that, people just don't realize radiation doesn't respect the borders of the fence of a Superfund site. And Rocky Flats is so contaminated.
Wait a minute. You mean to tell me that radiation won't go up to the fence and be like, oh, snap, I can't go past this line because the fence and the sign say no? You mean it actually gets past the fence?
They always try to say that. They say it in the news just recently. They said it in the news when there was a uranium hexafluoride canister explosion at the Honeywell plant in Kentucky. And, they said, oh, the monitors didn't go off beyond, at the fence line. So it never made it over the fence. And then meanwhile, you have videos that were uploaded to YouTube of these huge plumes coming out of this building and drifting into a neighborhood community. And one of the comments from a guy that lives in the community was like, oh, everybody needs to check their cars now. It looks like we're all getting new windshields. And the reason for that is because radiation affects glass, it affects metal. And these people know that live around there, which is really scary, because if it's doing that to, inorganic materials, what do you think it's doing to you and your kids? I mean, it's just crazy that people live around these areas. And, there were a few things that I really wanted to look into before I came on with you. And I'm still doing a lot of evidence gathering, I guess you could say, about not just the radiation levels, but some of the earth changes that we saw. And during this trip, Popeye and I actually heard or felt 3 earthquakes, which was crazy to me, because usually I don't feel them at all. And so I'm looking into that and what the relationship could be with some other evidence that's coming in with like hydrogen sulfide levels and things like that in people's wells.
Everywhere we went, like the day after or like 2 days after, it was like apocalyptic weather. It was really weird. It was, some of that was because of the planning and mapping out and figuring out which way to drive and stuff, and we were avoiding certain types of weather on purpose, and certain roads, because certain areas actually, like if you go through certain parts of the Rockies, if you actually go through the Rockies, like up in the mountains, the mountains create their own weather patterns. If you've never driven through the Rockies, you'd never understand what I'm saying. If you live in Colorado, you know exactly what I'm talking about, exactly what I mean. Anyway, I think what really just hit home with me was when we were standing there and you were, I bring this up for twofold reason. One, because it's the thing that like really kind of, I guess, hit it home for me. And because people have said on the comments in the YouTube video or on all of them, oh, but you guys didn't take the reading above the ground. Well, we did. And even the reading in the air was like 180, 160, 180, something like that, 190. So when we went over by the cactus and she put the Geiger down by the cactus, that's when it went up over 300. So I don't care. Here's my response when people say, well, but it was too close to the ground. What part of toxic level, hazmat level readings at ground level do you not get? Your feet are at ground level. Do you not think you're being irradiated if it's got over 300 counts per minute? Do you not think that you're not being irradiated if it's at ground level? Even if it's something seeping up. What is it seeping up from the ground level? That's not okay. That's not an excuse. The excuse of the Geiger is at the ground level does not work. Yeah, take two different sets of readings.
That's why we took samples. I mean, I could have sat there and did blocking tests and all kinds of other stuff. I would have loved to have mapped out that entire truck stop.
We didn't have time.
Happening, but we don't have time, and we're on a 4,000-mile trip that we have to get done in like 2 weeks.
We did this. It was like an impromptu reading. We had the Geiger with us, and you noticed that in subsequent trips, we are going to go back. You and I are actually planning on doing like real like evidence collection, radiation readings, like more technical, and logging everything along the West Coast out there and throughout New Mexico and Arizona and Colorado, which will probably end up crowdfunding so we can get some of the resources for that, because it's not cheap, trust me. But we do plan on doing something proper, but we only did it like last minute. But the argument that, it's at ground level, so it, you got them at ground level. So what? Even we took the air reading. You hear us talking in the video that we took readings in the air, and I get what you're getting at, but that's still that's not like, what are you going to blow it off if it's at the ground? Oh,
yeah, I couldn't get out of Albuquerque fast enough, really, because it was almost 200 in the air just walking around the truck stop when we started going around to the other flower beds.
Just walking around there
and stuff. It was creepy. It was crazy. It was crazy how bad it was. And there's this long legacy. Like everything there is named after Sandia. Everything. The National Museum of Nuclear History is in Albuquerque too. And then you have the isotopes. And I mean they've put this like they've put it into like everybody's minds there, how it needs to be like part of your life. And I'm sure a lot of people work in those industries too. So they've all been like brainwashed and mind controlled about how harmless it is.
It's nuke industry propaganda from like 30 miles out of Albuquerque into.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure. And even Lorraine Murray suffered from that when she worked for them, you know?
Well, yeah, you buy into it and you can, it's normalization, but you got to see it firsthand with your own eyes now. And it was cool because you got to see not just you're awake to more than just Fukushima, obviously, but you got to see it with the radiation industry firsthand, out there, how it's right. I mean, everywhere you turned, it was Sandia this, Sandia that. Come see the Isotopes play. I'm willing to bet that Sandia probably funded whatever field they play at or stadium or whatever. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, that was another thing I never expected to see too, like the Masonic influence in some of the cities that we went through. And Albuquerque has like a lot of weird, like one eye kind of stuff, like metal sculptures and things that they've like.
Yeah, there's a lot of occult symbolism all over the place that unless you go out and you actually see it, you don't realize it's there, but it's there.
And St. Louis was like that too.
Yeah,
St. Louis had a lot of stuff like that too.
Wasn't it amazing as soon as we got like west of St. Louis, how different the country was?
Yeah.
Like drastically changed overnight. Like literally within about an hour, you'd be surprised. The country is big though. It's huge. But that's what I think one of the things that really bothered me about the radiation readings was that like we were getting high readings all throughout Colorado, New Mexico, and parts of Arizona. And I know they did the nuke tests and all that, plus Fukushima and all that, but there were other parts of the country where the readings were really low, almost negligible, and the trees and the flora and the fauna was all okay. And now,
and then a lot of places where it wasn't okay, far from okay.
Yeah.
And I'm working on that too because I had just talked to Loren like 2 days ago about that. She wants me to send her all of the tree pictures that I took. And, I had taken pictures of like the pine needles because we know that cesium, that like certain radioactive materials, especially cesium, has a very strong uptake in pine trees, which is what, red forest syndrome around Chernobyl was. And that was like one of the first conversations I had with a real like nuclear specialist was when I had called Arnie Gunderson in like, I think it was May or June of 2011. And I was like, all the pine trees around me are turning red. Does this have something to do with Fukushima? And, he said, you need to read this and that and the other thing. And he said, we had been they found, I don't know, cesium was in the rainwater in a couple of northeast states at that time that had already been established. And so now, like what the trees that have just recently started turning red, which weren't the trees that turned red in 2011 around Michigan are all like still red, and it's not beetles. Because you can quickly rule out beetles by looking at the bark of the tree, where if there's bracts from insects, then you know that there's beetle activity. This is not what's going on here, but it started getting really bad again this winter. And we had a really rough winter here. We had a lot of snow and a lot of cold. And I noticed that the trees, like the color was off in everything, the pine trees especially. And a couple of pine trees that I photographed here in, I want to say it was like the beginning of April, the needles are all dead from the outer part of the needle out, like halfway, almost like a demarcation line of where these needles died. So this was something that happened within the last year of needle growth. And when I looked at the trees, like in Colorado, they had the exact same thing going on. And there was no beetle activity in those trees either, because I checked every time we stopped. What did you'd gas up the car and, go get coffee, because he drinks coffee like 24 hours a day. And I would go out with my Geiger and I'd go check the trees and I'd be, taking air readings and, some other readings here and there just to see what we were finding. We did this like all the way across the United States and back to see what do we need to be paying more attention to, and I didn't know that the trees were this bad everywhere. I know this is happening on the West Coast. Kevin Blanche had just actually walked from Pismo Beach to Monterey Bay, and he was talking to even the forest rangers there. All the trees are dead. The pine trees along the shores are all red. But we saw a lot of this pretty much every state that we were in places that had trees, like Kansas. There's, really nothing like that. Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas, though, have like their own problem. I have other problems going on. But wherever there were pine trees, there was evidence of this kind of like red forest syndrome. And there's a lot of nuclear stuff, bad stuff that's happened in the last few weeks, and it had kind of, Fukushima, of course, it's always going on, dumping into the Pacific all the time and steaming, out of the reactor cores and all that. And we have, hardly any handle on what's happening there because the Japanese are lying about it so much, TEPCO and the government. But then we had the Chernobyl fires that happened, and I started getting emails from RT because they wanted me to come on, and I was like, I can't do this. Like, we're in Arizona. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And I need to like start reading and doing a lot more research before I go on there. And then, there were some problems in the Midwest. Davis-Besse had a problem. Indian Point had like a transformer explode. There may have been something that happened at Fermi, 2 days ago that I've been getting emails about. The people around the Fermi plant have been getting high readings, and there was actually a retraction printed in the Toledo Blade about a possible fire at Fermi 1 site, which is where we had a meltdown in 1966. So there's a lot of nuclear stuff happening right now, and people are getting some really whacked out readings everywhere. And in fact,
plus
yesterday,
I don't mean to interrupt you, dear, but plus the uranium mining thing too, like we discussed in the videos, that there's, and by the way, I don't know if I told you this, but that beautiful serene canyon, remember we were saying, the corporations out there would probably just love to rape the hell out of it. They want to open up uranium mining back again by it. I don't know if I told you that. And I think it's slowly it's slowly cruising along towards being approved, which is disgusting. So that's nice. That's nice. Irradiate the whole Grand Canyon, and they're already dumping crap into the Colorado River. But anyway, I digress. I'm going to pause this, though, because the break is sneaking up on us. So hold that thought there, because we were already through the first hour. I told you this was going to go by fast.
Mm-hmm.
See, we're going to need like 8 or 9 shows. Seriously, we're going to need like 8 or 9 shows together just to get everything out from the road trip. There was that much stuff that happened. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, do not go anywhere. 3 short minutes. We still have another hour. I want to ask Christina what she thinks about the Meteor crater. You want to talk about science, ladies and gentlemen. You could spend hours out there if you're a science nerd like myself. Or Christina. She's actually a bigger science nerd than I am, I think, but which is kind of cool. Anyway, 3 short minutes. Stay tuned. Do not go anywhere. Another hour. First hour went right by. Anyway, PopeyeRadio.com, FederalJack.com. Stay tuned. Welcome back to hour number 2, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Popeye, from FederalJack.com and PopeyeRadio.com. Remember, you can check out all of my archives of all of the shows I've done, not only here on TFR, but the shows I've done on other radio networks that I was on before here, and any podcast or special broadcasts that I may have done. Anything of that ilk, I should say, you can go download it for free. Go over to PopeyeRadio.com. PopeyeRadio.com. In fact, all of my shows with Christina are over there too. We were actually listening to some of our older shows together, and it was kind of interesting, some of the stuff that she predicted happening, and pointed out and said, look, this is a possibility. It's interesting how you could see that it actually happened or played out over the course of the years since those subsequent interviews. So you should pay attention to what she has to say, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, I digress. So, joining me again for hour number 2, in case you're just joining me. Because sometimes people tune in and they miss the first hour because of work or whatever, and they go back and they listen later on in the archives. So if you're just tuning in, I have a co-pilot for this evening. I'm doing a second half of the road trip report, this time with my co-pilot from the road trip itself. Now, if you don't know, because you're just tuning in, the co-pilot was none other than, I can't even speak, listen to me, was none other than my good friend, Christina Consolo, a.k.a. Rad Chick. And the two of us were discussing when, in hour 1, that when we were on the road, we were hitting high levels of radiation. And I say we were hitting it because kind of we were driving in and out of these, I want to say plumes, bubbles, whatever the hell you want to call it. And sometimes we'd have nothing. Sometimes we'd have, I don't know, over 300 counts per minute, which is kind of scary. I don't remember what the exact number was. In Denver, we were 9 stories up at one point, and there were high levels. So anyway, in hour 1, we were discussing this. We were going over the road trip, everything else. And we were getting into, as I said, these radiation level readings. And Christina was systematically listing off all of these different reasons or possible reasons. Remember, when we're saying this stuff, by the way, we're not saying, yes, this is exactly why. We're listing all the different things that are out there that could be the possible reasons, which that should bother you in and of itself, that there's a list that you can scroll that looks like it's about a mile long of all the different possibilities. Anyway, I've already digressed way too much. So now that you're all caught up, if you're just joining us here for hour number 2, let me welcome back my co-pilot for this evening. And she's going to be joining me more frequently, as I said, ladies and gentlemen, because well, that's just the way it is. I'm making her come on air more often because she's a very intelligent woman, and you all should be exposed to what she has to say. So let's welcome back for hour number 2, one of my best friends, and as I said in hour 1, someone I love very much, Christina Consolo. Welcome back, hon.
Thanks, Popeye.
So,
something we neglected to talk about, though, and we didn't have time to really talk about, is just what has happened since last night about radiation levels worldwide. And we have like 450 or 60 now reactors worldwide, most of them in the northern hemisphere, 99 of them that are functioning and running in the United States. They release radiation all the time. They vent to the air. And in Finland, yesterday, there was reported that they had detected a possible, they detected nuclear radiation in the air over Finland and Norway, and I believe Sweden too. And it's kind of funny that that was the first place that detected radiation from the Chernobyl accident because of the way the weather patterns move there. And Sweden had picked it up first when Chernobyl happened 30 years ago and started, trying to get in contact with Russia to find out what was happening because they knew where the air was coming from. Finland had reported that they were detecting cobalt-60, niobium, which 95, which I've never even heard of, and cesium-134. These are all associated with a leaking nuke plant or a nuclear accident. And this just hit the wires, I believe, late last night. And there was only one article, but it's from the Radiation Watchdog in that part of the world, so we know that it's legit. And, whenever you see something like this, then immediately you need to go to the weather, look at what the weather patterns are for that time period, where the rain has been occurring during that time period. And they said that this would have happened between May 4th and May 11th. And this is probably one of the areas of the world that I'm most concerned with about a new accident happening, and that's the Ukraine. And we've already had a couple of problems that have occurred at the Zaporizhzhia, which is one of the largest reactor complexes in Europe, in the Ukraine. And, they have a civil war that's going on, right next door. I don't even know how many miles away, like 300 kilometers maybe. And there's no protection at these sites or any of their spent fuel ponds. Like the ponds are just all out in the open, or they have stuff that's in casks out in the open. There's like little to no security. They're supposed to have like concrete buildings over the top of them in case there's ever a fire so that they can do fire control. They don't have anything like that in the Ukraine. They are running all of these reactors are the like ancient Russian technology that has no containment, like Chernobyl was. And, they're very old, and there's a lot going on, a lot of power problems, so they have their reactors running over capacity of what they were doing before the Civil War started. So that is a really, like, dangerous place to be. The air currents from the Ukraine go basically right to Europe. And I don't know what it was today. I haven't had time to really check, and I'm going to be doing that later. This evening, but the Geigers that we have, the Geigers that we can afford that are less than $10,000, basically more like a couple $100. But there's some researchers who have like the $3,000 Polymaster. Those are really good instruments. They're nothing like what the governments use or these watchdog agencies use. Their Geigers cost sometimes in excess of $100,000. The ones that we're using only pick up maybe 5% of what's there. So, when we're getting 316 at a truck stop with an inspector, I got to wonder, what is the radiation really? And that's why we took samples. Because it's like, this is a hot spot. It's affecting the plants around it. Cactuses don't take in, a lot of water. So there isn't a whole bunch of uptake in there.
It's 10 feet from the door of the restaurant. I mean,
yeah, the little kids are walking by all the time too, who are closer to the ground, or people's pets are
bingo.
sniffing.
And what you just said really, like, again, and I didn't even realize this. Okay, all the time I spent with you, I didn't even think to ask you that. Is there like a difference in? I mean, that's how naive I am. I mean, I know a lot of stuff, and yet I'm naive about a lot of this stuff, right? I didn't even realize that the different Geigers had different percentages of like what they picked up. So. We were using Miss Milky's, which is her Geiger was awesome. But if we're using this Inspector Geiger, and it only picks up like 5%, and it was over 300 when we had it down by the ground, what do you think like a $3,000 or $4,000 or $10,000 Geiger would be? I mean, do you, in your estimation, now this is all speculation, but do you think it could at least be double that because of it only picks up a small percentage, or do you think it could?
Oh, yeah, it could be 10 or even 100 times that. Sure. And the problem with, like, when it's on the ground, one of the first things that that people had started reporting, or actually vets had started reporting after Fukushima happened, is they had this enormous increase in gastroenteritis in sniffer dogs. Dogs who have their nose to the ground, or dogs that are very small, like Shih Tzus, who are very close to the ground, and children are very close to the ground. And when a little kid, comes in contact with something or comes in close proximity to something that's radioactive, the way that can affect that person, affect that little kid, is much, much worse than it would affect an adult, because their cells are still dividing. So, like for an infant, whose cells reproduce at an enormous rate, it's like 1,000 times worse, something that they're exposed to when they're in utero, which is why it's so important that pregnant women are using filtered water and aren't eating anything that grows in possibly contaminated areas, because that can, severely compromise the health of their baby, depending on the time of gestation, like how far along they were in their pregnancy when they were exposed. Like the first 3 months, the cells are dividing, the eyes are forming, the brain is forming, and you have, in the second trimester, you have organogenesis, where all the organs are developing. In the third trimester, it's just the brain that's pretty much developing. So if that child is exposed in the middle, of the trimester, like month 4, 5, and 6, then they're most likely going to have problems with their internal organs. That's how, and it's like 100% correlation to that if you know when a pregnant woman was exposed. And sometimes they're exposed unintentionally, like they have a medical test and, you know, something happens during the medical test. So, you know, these, regardless of where it's coming from, we're never really going to have the instruments that we need to be able to check it, which is why I'm taking a sample and sending it to somebody who works at an institute that has a $100,000 Geiger type machine that will analyze it and chart out exactly what it is and exactly how it lays out in the graphs so that the evidence is incontrovertible. But for right now, you know, all I know is we had some hot readings there. There's multiple sources. It could have been WIP. It could have been from the legacy of bomb testing. It could be something fresh that came in on the tires of a truck that visited that truck stop. And if it is, that's even worse because that means it's particleized. It's like, you know, attached to the dust or a fine sand, which can blow around and then you breathe it in. Internal exposure is much worse than external. Like the DU mining. That's like when we were in that one video, we were talking about it because the first video we put up that I played some of the audio from, that was one of the comments. That, you know, there's also the DU mining. Listen to me, the uranium mining, and that when we were talking about that, I mean, think about that. Can you imagine if, like, now you saw trucks up close and personal because I was driving, so you got a chance to sit and see as I would go past these tractor trailers extremely closely. You got to see the undercarriage. You're like me, you pay attention to detail, so you were looking at a lot of the stuff. You were paying attention to it. Now that you have a physical and a personal visual understanding of the undercarriage of the trucks, think about that whole scenario again of all that uranium dust and all of the stuff it could be on. Now, as a former mechanic, think about that. Okay, if it rains in the undercarriage and everything, okay, some of that might get washed off, and that's bad enough because now it's hitting the cars like the spray. Remember when they would pass us or I would pass a truck and you had to go through that wall of water that would come off the back of it? Well, that's all irradiated, right, at some point. So that's nice. But besides that, what about when the truck pulls into the truck stop? Driver gets out. Maybe it didn't rain. Now that stuff could be, like you said, all over the place. What about when the truck breaks down? Remember, there were truck washes there, which is also bad enough if the guy washes all that stuff off right there at the local truck wash. But what about if the truck breaks down and he has to go to the mechanic there at the truck stop? And the mechanic has to open the hood and he's climbing up and all over and underneath it. And he's got dust all over him and he goes, "Oh, this damn dust." Starts wiping his hands on his shirt, on his uniform, which he then goes home with. And his wife washes it in their washing machine, which now her clothes are in there too, and so are their kids. So now they've effectively been cross-contaminated. But hey, don't worry about it, because radioactive material shouldn't be, you know, there should be no safety precautions. There should be no rules. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. They're more concerned about what you're doing on the internet and about what you're saying on Twitter or Facebook than they're worried about this scenario. And this isn't fear-mongering. I mean, this is common sense. Oh, and there's a whole history of this happening before. You know, they used to have a huge problem with trucks that went into rocky flats, or even cars that drove through there because, you know, with it being a Superfund site, now they limit, of course, the activities there. But they used to have trucks that were going in and out of there all the time, and the trucks would track radioactive particles to other parts, you know, of the counties, the surrounding counties. And then it would, you know, the drainage will end up elsewhere. This stuff constantly moves through the environment. And if you think of it like just down to the molecular level, okay, and let me use another analogy to try to put this into a perspective for some people. You know how sometimes, like, drug dogs will smell marijuana that's hidden in the gas tank of a car? Like, smugglers will hide marijuana in the gas tank, and drug dogs will still find it. Do you know why that happens? Because it leaks through. Yeah. The molecules will actually work their way out of the molecules from the cannabis or the marijuana will actually work their way out of the PVC pipe. Yep. and then the plastic bag, and then the duct tape that surrounds it, and then the gasoline, and then the metal gas tank. And nothing is like when you look at something that's like a hardened structure, it's not really that way. It's the lattice that these molecules form that give it its hardness. And this happens too. And we get into this with Wigner, also in the Wigner interview that I did with Loren. You have the stuff is constantly moving through the environment every time the wind blows, and then it rains. It can pick the stuff up from one area where it's just windy around Rocky Flats and deposit it hundreds of miles away, sometimes even thousands of miles away, like the thunderstorm in Troy, which was a chapter in a book written by Dr. Ernest Sternglass. And when the Chernobyl fires were going on too, and they're like 35,000 acres are burning, everyone is thinking, people who don't know about radiation and about how contaminated that site is, well, that was 30 years ago. So the stuff is probably like decayed and gone by now, or, it's way down into the ground where it's not going to bother anybody. And, in a forest situation, like where you have contamination and massive contamination like you do around Chernobyl, you have, the upper levels of the trees, which is the canopy, and then what is the middle level? Understory, I think they call it. And then you have the shrubbery, and then you have like all that debris on the ground, which is like the leaves and the pine needles and the pieces of bark and, any kind of decaying vegetation or, animals that have passed away or anything like that that's in the ground. When there's a forest fire, or where there's a grassland fire, like at Rocky Flats or something, the first 6 inches of topsoil burns too. And that's where a lot of that stuff has settled into. Or it's been taken up by the tree, and it's in the pollen of the tree, or it's in, the bark and the wood of the tree now. So there's a bunch of different ways that this stuff will go back into the environment and again, circle the northern hemisphere. And in the case of Chernobyl, it went everywhere. In the case of Fukushima, it's gone everywhere, and it's continuing to do so. And one of the things Loren Murray had said about Fukushima at the very beginning was they need to spray that place down with concrete, spray everything down with concrete. As soon as the building started exploding, she was going on interviews and saying they need to spray everything with concrete, like right now. And that's just to keep the particles down to an area where they can deal with it later. And they never did any of that. They didn't, they tried putting it in bricks at some of the weapons labs and some of these Superfund site, and that just decays. And, we have weather that ensures that this stuff moves around. And in Japan, they've actually been able to measure, because some of the areas have such high contamination of cesium, that the cesium gets steamed out of the ground when it's hot after rain because of the existing contamination that was there from the initial accident. Well, yeah, that's on the ground, right? The air quotes on the ground. But when the ground gets hot and the steam comes up, it puts that stuff back up into the air again. And then it travels, dozens or hundreds, or in some cases, thousands of miles again. The same thing happens in the Pacific Ocean.
What about when there's wind?
Oh, and wind too, for sure. And these particles will attach themselves to dust. And
wouldn't it be the equivalent of just like when Doug Rocky and I were talking about the DU particles and how like there's American bases here that, especially in like hurricane prone areas, that are now contaminated. And I said to him, you heard the interviews. I said, so that means when a hurricane comes through, it's going to re-suspend this into the atmosphere? And he said, yes. I said, so essentially it's a radioactive hurricane. And he said, yes. That's nice. Yep. It might be mildly radioactive, but isn't it true that any level of radiation is no good for you because it's cumulative?
Absolutely. And of course it's more dangerous to little kids whose cells are dividing than it is to children who are fully developed, which they aren't until their late teen years. So yeah, that's absolutely the same kind of mechanism, and that happens Well, that did happen and continues to happen in Hawaii, where they used DU on their firing ranges. And Loren was actually in Hawaii and interviewed by their news one time a few years ago because of the level she was getting prior to Fukushima. She was picking up high levels of radiation all over the islands, and she could directly attribute it to the munitions that were being used on the firing ranges of the bases. So it's a horrendous problem, and it's happening everywhere. And we can't always we can't certainly measure it with what we have. It's just that if you know that it's there, you can take steps to protect yourself. Although we're not going to have, the answers that we need about the Fukushima accident alone in probably our lifetimes. We know that it's there, and we know what has happened historically, and you have to connect the dots for yourself. And if anyone who listens to this broadcast, whether they're in the chat room now or later on, if they find it on YouTube, if you just go read some of the stories about what's happened around Rocky Flats, and near Boulder, Colorado, and then the levels that we were getting around Denver. I mean, it was just extraordinary. Thank God they have pot there now. Thank God they have legal pot, because they're going to need it. Cannabis is very protective to radiation exposure, but there's no magic fix. It's a combination of things that people need to do. They need to make sure that the water that they're drinking is safe, and the food that they're eating is good, and it's whole food, Whole Foods, cooking for Whole Foods, and not eating anything that's processed, and certainly not eating anything that's GMO. And then, keeping your body chemistry alkaline instead of acidic, so that if you do, have the exposure to things that they can't grow into a cancer as easily. And there's, that's what the internet is good for, is for doing this kind of research. It's not good for having social interactions for people, but it's very, very good for doing research about those kinds of things.
I'm glad you mentioned that again, because we're coming up to the break, and we're going to get into that same stuff on the other side. I want to talk about the Meteor crater a little bit, and actually about what you mentioned, the social interaction thing. But that's one thing that you and I kept saying over and over and over again to each other, that interacting via Facebook or Twitter or social media or YouTube comments or even on Skype or just on the phone doesn't have the same effect. I mean, if you're only talking on Facebook or whatnot and you're talking to the same person, you guys should eventually just have a Skype conversation. That I agree with. But getting a chance to hang out with you, getting a chance to hang out with Aaron and Melissa in person, getting a chance to hang out with Joe in person, it's just different. You get a chance to actually, like you said, you get a chance to actually see that I actually am the real way in real life that I am on air. It's not an act. It's actually how I exist. I actually operate this way. And I think that it's like that with any of this. Besides just social interaction, I mean, you have a better understanding of the openness and the vastness of this country. You have a better understanding of many things because you saw it with your own eyes as opposed to just seeing it on the internet. So the internet is a great tool for research, and it is a great way to connect. But I don't think we should strictly have just those type of relationships with people. If you're gonna, I mean, not with everybody, but if you have someone that you're close to, that you interact with all the time, I mean, if you guys can, then obviously talk on Skype, but maybe you guys should meet up for coffee or something once or twice. It's interesting to put a face and mannerisms to the voice. And it's neat. I don't know. It's just it's basic human interaction, which seems to be being removed from society by the powers that shouldn't be. Get out and see your neighbor. Remember those days? Remember when we were younger? we used to be able to go have barbecues, and you'd have like the neighborhood-wide barbecue, where it was almost like a mini block party. Anyway, the break is sneaking up on us, ladies and gentlemen. 3 short minutes. Don't go anywhere. When we get back, Christina and I will finish up with tonight's broadcast. Wow. Time is just flying by tonight. Stay tuned. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. Final segment. That's like the 2 fastest hours in radio I think I've ever done. Just blew right by. Don't worry. Christina will be on for subsequent broadcasts. As I said, there is no way we could fit in everything that we experienced in 2 weeks into one show, let alone the depth of it. We were just talking about the readings earlier just a little bit. We're going to get into like possible reasons and all that stuff more in future shows. But I want to shift the gears a little bit because we got a final segment left here. And I was talking about the connections with humans and with each other and the interpersonal relationships and stuff, and I was bringing up that point that you had made in the very beginning of the broadcast, and then we went to break, and I wanted to bring up the Meteor crater because this kind of fits into that, and I had mentioned this earlier, but we didn't get into it in depth, and I want to kind of mention this and bring this up because it dovetails from that. One, we had some very extremely interesting, I would say, interactions with people at the facility itself, the people that work there, and other people that were there. As I said, we gave out business cards. And it started because the kid behind me, this like 15-year-old kid, made a comment about, man, can you imagine the heat that had to be generated to vaporize steel? And I was just like, yeah, because, simple office fires won't melt steel. And the kid just looked at me, and it just snowballed from there. And then we met 2 guys that were on walkabout. It was pretty cool. They had actually heard about the incident at the Grand Canyon because their father, one of them's father, had called them to make sure that it wasn't them the day before. It was just interesting how everything was kind of interconnected. It was very, very interesting to say the least. But not only did we have these unique interactions with other people, but Christina herself had this own unique interaction with nature and the universe. Now, she is what I affectionately refer to as a science and rock tard, which I am as well. And we both like, amethysts and geodes and stuff like that. And we both like science. So I knew that while we were out, and one of the spots that we were going to take Marisa's ashes was the Meteor crater. And I don't know if I had even told her this, but I sprung this one on her while we were out there. But I already knew that I was doing this, but I don't think I told her beforehand. If I remember, I sprung it on her. So we went out there, and I knew that she would love this place, okay? I knew you would. So, and I had been there 18 years ago, and I knew how they have the building set up. When you come around the building and you walk out into this thing, you literally walk out into the crater the way they like. You come around the corner and you're like doom doom doom. There's because you see like part of the ridge, but you don't see the hole. And then there's a building off to your right, so you can't. And then there's like a wall and everything else, so you don't see any. Because there's this little courtyard where they have like this thing for the astronauts and some other stuff. And then there's the gift shop and a Subway sandwich shop. So you don't really see the crater till you come around the corner. And as soon as you round the corner, you're on the rim of this thing. Now, I bring this up because it's a very powerful experience. And there's a lot of stuff that we noticed, which I'll bring up in a second, but it was so powerful that it literally took your breath away. And you grabbed my hand, and I thought you were going to break it. You squeezed it so hard. What did you feel in that moment when you saw that? Like, explain to the listeners, if you can. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I just want, because I know it was very powerful. So in your own best way, you can. You don't have to get all, wax the poetic, as they would say. But just, what did you feel when you saw it? Because I know what I felt. But I want to give you the floor first. What did you feel when we rounded that corner and you saw it? Because you literally walk out into it.
we are so small and we are so insignificant. I'm getting like shaky just thinking about it. And we took so many pictures there, and you took some really amazing like panoramic photos there, and the pictures you can't get a feel for how big this thing is, for just how enormous it is. And I was expecting to find like radioactivity there, possibly, which I did, but not in the meteor crater, inside the building on a table, which was super random, like really high levels on a piece of like Formica tabletop, which is probably some dust somebody had that they dragged in there. But
Yeah, I
wow,
forgot about that.
if one of those things, ever hits near a city, it's over. It's over. It's so crazy. And the ground was rippled out from the crater too. And if you look at it on Google Earth, you can't see that rippling that you can when you're driving up to it. And from even when we were far away and you were like, that's the meteor crater, I thought it was like a mesa.
It was kind of cute because we were driving up and you thought that the hole was going to be like like the size of a bowling ball or something a little bit bigger. And I was like, you see that thing out there? And you're like, yeah. I'm like, that looks like a big mesa. And you're like, yeah, that's the rim of the meteor crater. And you
can't take it in all at once. Like you have to, and they have, these little like stations that you can go to and you can look at the fault in the ground that was created from this impact. It actually like caused a fault to form in the tectonic plates. That's how hard this thing hit. When you look at it from Google Earth, you can kind of see that it hit at an angle and that it probably shot a lot of stuff out of like one side, which is where the building is now. To displace that amount of rock, I mean, it was just crazy. And the only thing that I've seen, and I haven't seen any of these in person, in real life, in real time, just on the internet, are the craters that are left over from some of the atomic tests that we did.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to go near those things anyway.
Yeah.
They're probably still highly radioactive.
Yeah, they are. I'm still processing the meteor crater.
I put a picture.
I really am. I can't really put into words what I felt when I saw it for the first time.
I took one of the panoramas I took when we went up to the top observation deck, and then I stood up on top of where that little viewing telescope thing is, and I stood there and I did the panorama. I put it in the graphic I did for the show, and the graphic I made for the show is I'm going to use when I do the YouTube archive, so people will kind of be able to get an idea. When you see the graphic and you hear us talking about it, and you see the graphic, and you're looking at the meteor crater, on the right-hand side in the panoramic view, there's a white, because it's the panorama is small compared to the rest of the image, but when you look at it, it gives you because it's so small, you kind of get a view of the whole. You can view the whole thing nicely, I should say, but when you see the picture, even if you blow it up, you'll see like a little white structure on the right-hand side, white reddish. That's actually the museum. That's a huge building. It's pretty big. And that's how small it is in comparison to the rest of that crater. In fact, if you look real close, and because I shrunk it down when I was in Photoshop, but in that image, if you look on the lower right, there's a little, like at right kind of in the crater itself, but right on the outside edge of the crater floor, on the right, you'll see a little white spot with two little dark spots on it. That's a viewing platform with two human beings on it. This thing's almost like a mile across, and currently it's like 650 feet deep. One of the boulders, you saw it, one of the boulders on the one ridge is the size of a house. It's awe-inspiring. You realize that you're very tiny. And like Christina said, and I brought this up before, and I'm glad you brought this up, when you look out at the the flat desert. It's even more incredible when you look out for a second because you see all that energy that was released. You can literally see, like you said, it looks like rolling hills, and then you realize it was flat desert floor at one point. And that was just the shockwave traveling through the earth that made the ground ripple. I mean, can you imagine everything around there for at least 3 or 4 seconds was like liquid. The dirt like had turned like liquefied as that wave traveled through it. I mean, it's just. I wonder the amount of remember, I think I asked you this, the amount of natural radiation that would have been thrown off by an explosion like that. Do you think it would have been anything close to like a warhead going off, like Hiroshima, or because it's not a nuke, because it was an iron meteorite? Do you think that makes a huge difference?
Well, I know a lot of meteors are radioactive. They do detect radioactivity. Sometimes that's how they find the pieces, like when it happened in Chelyabinsk in Russia, not last February, but the year before. That one was like, I want to say it was like the size of the hood of a car. And it broke into lots of little pieces too. There was a big chunk that landed in a lake. There were smaller chunks that broke off and took out some like brick buildings and a munition plant in the city. And there were lots and lots of little pieces everywhere that landed just in the snow. And they found a lot of those pieces by using Geiger counters. I expected to see like some level of radioactivity there, and there was really nothing in comparison to what the background which was about 60. But I mean, the dust cloud that had to have been thrown up by this thing had to have been crazy, and that thing hit in one piece. There were no other smaller craters around there. That thing hit in one piece, which just blows me away because, how many security cameras have you seen footage from where there's like somebody catches a nice meteorite that comes in on a security camera, and you always see them like breaking apart. This thing didn't break apart when it hit. If it did, it wasn't, a significant from coming into our atmosphere. It had to have been so powerful that I would expect that it probably threw the Earth off its axis, much in the same way that a Chile quake, I think it was like an 8.8 did.
Like a wobble?
Like a wobble. I would expect that it probably did that.
You can see that whatever could have fallen off just burnt up. Like it must have been, it burned up. I think when we were looking at the, and I have to go back and I have to look at the pictures in the video I took, but there were, because it showed a couple other, meteor impacts, like pictures of them in the little museum we went in. But I think they said that it only lost, I think it's not even 10% of its original mass. I don't even think it was that high. I think it was like less than maybe 5% of its original mass. Might have been maybe even as low as 1. I have to go back and look, but it was somewhere between like 1 and 10% of its original mass, the meteorite itself. And it was just solid iron. They said most of it's still at the bottom of the crater, like it hit and it went out like a shotgun blast.
Yeah.
It's like 3,000 or 4,000 feet below. And then that you saw the meteorite. It's that huge chunk that when you come up to the top of the stairs, that's the biggest piece that they were able to recover out of it. And that thing weighs 1,400 pounds. And it's maybe 3.5, 4 feet wide. And it's only maybe 2 feet tall. It's not that big, like physically. But it's just, it's obviously dense. Interesting stuff. Very perspective changing when you stand on the edge of that crater, to say the least. Right? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yeah, those two really cool backpackers that we talked to I think they were from the Midwest while we were there. They were the ones that told us about how their families had been calling them because they were worried they were at the Grand Canyon and that they might have been one of the guys that fell off of it. I think that's how we found out.
Well, that was like the double confirmation because that morning is the morning that I opened because we weren't checking emails or texts or anything. There were spots where we didn't even have cell reception. It was so nice to unplug, by the way, which I'm going to ask you about your thoughts on because we have about 10 minutes left. But, one of the listeners had messaged me and said, "Hey, is everything okay?" And he sent me a link. And then that morning, we opened it, checked it out, and then we went over to the Meteor crater. And it was crazy because, like I said, it was very interesting how everything was kind of interconnected on this weird level. Because they had gotten a call and their parents had asked them about it, and then we got into a conversation about Fukushima, and they knew all about Fukushima. Mm-hmm. And they were like, "Oh yeah, Fukushima's bad." And they were very awake to what was going on. They knew they knew about the Illuminati. They had heard about that. They understood what the agenda of the New World Order was. I was just kind of blown away. So then we gave them my business cards. Thank you, by the way, for having my stack of business cards in your purse because I had totally forgotten mine. I got out and I'm like, I'm not going to need my business cards on the rim of a meteor crater. That's the one place I really ended up needing them. It's interesting times hanging out with you, let me tell you. Right? We make an interesting pair hanging out on the rim of a meteor crater, truthing, talking about Fukushima, 9/11, and giving, and I hate that term, truthing, but you know what I mean, giving out information and business cards.
Yeah, it's cool to see. I love seeing anyone that's like, especially like college age, like my kids' age that are awake, and most of my kids' friends are too. And which is weird because there's this whole segment of population that's like, late 20s to like, probably early 50s that just isn't. I don't know. It's weird. And the people that we ran into on being out on the road like that, it was mostly vets, and it was like college kids. They're the only ones that seem interested in making road trips. There were very, very few middle-aged professionals, I would call them. And except at the Grand Canyon, but it's a national park, so you have like this weird like melting pot going on, which I love. And I used to go to Niagara Falls a lot with my girls because it's only a couple hours away, and we wanted to see it in the spring and in the summer and in the fall and in the winter. And there's always, you hear all these different languages being spoken around you. And, everybody's in this, like, kind of in awe of everything. And so, that was nice. But that wasn't like how it was everywhere. There was nobody. And I know schools are still in session and things like that. But it was interesting that it was mostly just college kids and vets out on the road. And then the truckers, the people who were working that route.
It was interesting how you could see in certain areas people were happy to see one another, and then, like you said, when you got back towards the East Coast,
I'm still almost having a panic attack from the way people drove after not being around it for so long.
Oh my God, it was horrible. Remember, we were driving, we were out in like Nowheresville for so long that when we had actually. The first like big city that we actually drove into was Denver after like being out in the middle of nowhere for like 4 or 5 days. And we got into Denver, and what did you say to me? You looked at me and you said, "I think my PTS is kicking in from just my city PTS is kicking in just from being here." And it totally was, because the vibe changed like foomp, like that. Like as soon as you got into the city, and Denver's a cool city, but like it was just wow. I don't know. The vibe, when you're out in the middle of nowhere and you see nothing for days and days and days, and then you go back into like concrete jungle, it's like, ugh. And I don't know, maybe we could feel the Wi-Fi. I don't know. It's just...
Oh, for sure. For sure. That's definitely part of it too. It like ramps up your anxiety levels. You could definitely feel that. And I've heard other people describe that. I had this guy on my show a few times who was from Australia, Jeff Wefferson, and he had been like on an island somewhere and then had to go into the city to get stuff. And he has like a Wi-Fi meter. And he was saying, as soon like his levels of anxiety, he could feel them rising because he'd been away from it for so long. You definitely feel that.
It was weird.
Yeah, it was really weird.
When we drove in, like, you hit the nail on the head. You were like, I think it's like kicking in. And I was like, wow. We got about 5 minutes left. I want you to pontificate your final thoughts here on everything. But besides that, disconnecting from Facebook. I'll throw this question out and then you can answer this and then get into your final thoughts on everything. Or at least for this episode anyway. But disconnecting from Facebook and Twitter and the internet and like cell phones for days and just actually reconnecting with nature and the planet and people again. Thoughts?
You know, on Facebook, it's weird because like I would see people that are posting a lot of stuff about, you know, news things and important information that they want to share with other people. But then I'd go and I'd look at their activity log and I see that they've been on Facebook like 12, 14 hours a day for the entire time that I was gone. And all they've been doing is like sharing news stories. Like, which is kind of a ridiculous activity when you think about it, because you're not really doing anything. You're not creating anything new. You're not, you're reading like news that's been regurgitated from somewhere else and probably heavily censored or interfered with. If it comes from like a mainstream source, it's not like the truth about what's really happening. And when you don't pay attention to your phone and you make observations about your surroundings and the people that are surrounding you, and then those people are all doing the same thing because they're not really connected to their phones either. You remember what it was like before all these things took over our lives. And it made me like really want to just kind of unplug from it, not completely, but really limit my time, which I had been kind of doing already because of some things that I was working on. But I realized that it was much more important for me to do that in order to keep turning out like quality information, to do the kind of research that I need, which requires actually sitting down and reading the pile of books that I have in my room. Some of it is like my dad's stuff, which I just acquired recently, and some other things that I've been collecting for a while, and I just keep putting it like in this pile of like, when I have time to read, I want to read this. And the pile is just sitting there. And I have, you know, there's so many things that I need to look into, but I think that it becomes more important for me to do, just as a person, to do the kind of research that I need without being distracted by my Facebook thing going off that, you know, someone tagged me in a post, or, you know, checking how many times my Twitter someone's retweeted something of importance. And we have to look at things from like a different perspective, which means like unplugging. And I mean, really unplugging. And I've had a hard time plugging back into all of this since I've got back. And I've been out of town before. I've had to go out of town, and I've been away from things for a while. And you just get like so caught up in things sometimes that you don't have the time to do what you really need to do. And one of the things I had said on the show that I was on with you is that, you know, the most important thing that we have is like our relationships with other people. And that's definitely more true than ever for me. And we need to go on more road trips, Popeye.
We're going to, my dear.
So let me know when you're ready.
Don't worry. I'll let you know. I told you we're going to go do the West Coast. And I actually I have to go to Michigan soon. So I'll be back up in your neck of the woods. So I'll be coming up by the Great Lakes to say hello.
Oh, really?
Yes. So we want to do a road trip again? Want to do another road trip? Want to go south? We can go. We can go check out the south. We can do radiation readings all around, like Florida, Louisiana, Alabama.
You know, we only talked about like 3 states this whole 2 hours.
I know.
We went to like 10 or 11.
We were in 10 together, and I went through 21 total.
Yeah.
I know, ridiculous. That's okay. You're going to have to come back on. Don't worry, ladies and gentlemen. She'll be back on in like the next week or so, because I'll be dragging her back on. Maybe one day I'll even get you in studio. Who knows? We'll have to see. I'll get the secondary mic hooked up. We can do an in-studio session. Anyway, we have like a minute and a half left. Thank you so much for coming on tonight and giving us 2 hours. I know you're a very busy lady. Especially, I kept you unplugged for 2 weeks and away from everybody. So,
and I needed it so much more than I thought that I did. I really went just to like support, give you like, emotional support with everything that you were doing, and document the trip for you. And it turned out to be so much more than that. And so I have a lot to thank you for, too.
Well, you are an awesome co-pilot, and I mean it when I tell you I love you. So anyway, we're running out of time. I can hear the music sneaking up behind us. Plug your channel on YouTube, your Twitter, and Miss Milky's stuff. And plug Climate Viewer and Jim's work and stuff while you're at it. Go ahead.
Yeah, Rad Chick on Climate Viewer News, Rad Chick on YouTube, Rad Chick Forecast on Twitter. And that's probably the 3 major ones.
Yeah. Check out her work, ladies and gentlemen. Check out Miss Milky's work. Pay attention. There's people out there telling you what's going on. Not the mainstream. Support them.
This is Sparta!
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. I wish I had more time because about 1,000 other things right now that hang in my brain. Anyway, Christina will be back on with me in about a week or so. Stay tuned for that. Ladies and gentlemen, as I always tell you, the solutions to our problems are an inside job. Go out and be the superheroes that I know you all are. I love you all. I know Christina does.